Welcome everyone to today's webinar on strategies for personal and collective care in challenging times. We're so pleased today to have our guest speaker, Karine Silverwoman, who will be leading our workshop this afternoon. And I think you're in for a treat of all the information and expertise that she's got in store for us ahead. So before we begin, I do want to begin with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we gather on the traditional territory of a number of First Nations and acknowledge their stewardship of this land throughout the ages. We seek a new relationship with the original peoples of this land, one that is based in honor and deep respect. So just want to go over the format for today's session. After the introduction here, I'll just give some basic logistics of the session, talk a little bit about Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, introduce our speaker. My colleague Laura Proctor will introduce our speaker and also do an acknowledgement of an award that we have. We have our presentation, and then we'll have a question and answer period. Then following just with some upcoming events and resources, and then contact information for our organization and Karine. So everyone's microphones will be muted during the webinar today. We do encourage everyone to post comments, any questions that you have. Please put those in the question answer box. The chat box is there for everyone to dialogue, make some comments. We will be sharing some links during the session as well as things come up. So just, we try to keep things interactive so you can chat amongst everyone, and we'll be posting things as well. As I mentioned, we have our ASL interpreters. You'll see both their images on your screen. You can pin the ASL on your own computer, or you can make the speaker's images larger. You can pull the line between the speakers and your presentation larger or smaller, depending on which view that you would like, as well as there's a little grid box at the top of the speaker where you can choose the format or layout that you want on your own screen. And as I mentioned, we also have closed captioning enabled. We do appreciate your feedback at the end of our sessions. So we would appreciate if you took 5 minutes or 2-3 minutes just to finish that survey. It's a quick, checkbox. We'll send a link in a follow-up email, but also as at the end of the session, there's a little pop-up box just to complete the survey. We are recording today's session, and it will be available on the website within hopefully either later today or tomorrow. And any links or documents that our speaker has mentions will be posted on the website. I do want to make noted that the PowerPoint presentation today will not be available, just the recording and all the shared documents, which has most of the presentation key points in those handouts that she has provided. And just lastly, we do appreciate people may have certain issues or circumstances that they may want to address. We understand that we want to make sure that you understand that this is a public forum, and we do appreciate you. We want to respect your privacy. So if you have a specific question and related to a personal matter, please feel free to reach out to Laura or myself, and we'd be pleased to assist you. We do consultations almost every day. People calling us, agencies asking for support, and we can provide that information or referral for you. So you can post a general question, more than happy to do that, and we'll try our best to answer those in the time that we have. For those who haven't joined our webinars, if maybe this is your first time, we just want to give a little bit of background about who we are. Our mission really is to make sure that all seniors in Ontario feel safe, have a voice, and are respected within our communities. And we work with many organizations who have similar mandates and like-minded organizations to advocate for better services and supports for seniors and increase that collaboration and coordination to make sure that seniors get the supports they need when they're experiencing some form of abuse or that vulnerability. We want to prevent the situation from happening. We were given the mandate to implement Ontario's strategy to combat elder abuse in 2003, and we continue to do that today. That is funded through the Ontario Ministry for Seniors and Accessibility. We are a nonprofit organization, but we do receive funds to implement that strategy, which is a primary work of our organization. I now want to turn it over to my colleague, Laura Proctor, who's going to talk a little bit about the importance of the Victims and Survivors of Crime Week, and then introduce our speaker. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rayanne. So I wanted to take the opportunity and highlight that last week was Victim and Survivors of Crime Week. It is a recognition week that annually we recognize across Canada. And really the focus yearly is to raise awareness about issues that victims and survivors of crime are facing. And through our lens, of course, during last week, and then now we've overflowed into this week, we are recognizing some extra supports that victims of crime that are seniors face. Many cases of elder abuse are extremely complex, and there's many layers of dynamics. So we do want to take the opportunity to highlight really vulnerable victims of crime. And the reason for today's webinar is that this year we're highlighting the theme the federal government instilled was the power of collaboration. So today we want to take the opportunity and highlight how important it is to truly collaborate, to get out of our silos in our professions and collaborate with one another, ultimately for the final goal being to prevent or safeguard or support a vulnerable senior in your own local community. So this year, we're really excited to be able to highlight a recognition award, really revolving around those unsung heroes. And this year, I am absolutely honored and as well as thrilled to highlight Kevin Allen. And he is our recipient of 2023's Community Recognition Award. So I want to take the opportunity to highlight why Kevin was nominated and why we chose him as the key recipient this year. Kevin is a volunteer executive director of Sacred Blessings, which is a meal program that began in March 2020. This program assists seniors as well as others by helping address daily living challenge by preparing and delivering wholesome and homemade meals. Kevin, along with his wife, Jan, are supported by a whole team of volunteers who cook, pack, and deliver thousands of meals to seniors as well as vulnerable community members. And what really struck me when learning about Kevin is that this whole organization is 100% volunteer run. So way to go, Kevin. We are excited that we will be mailing you an Iceberg Award, which is being designed and made up as we speak. I did quote Kevin's feedback when he learned about receiving this award, is that he's truly honored to be nominated, but he remains humble in many efforts as he is just one of the many volunteers that donate his precious time and energy to serve their community. So congratulations, Kevin, on behalf of myself and the whole team at Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. So now on to our keynote speaker for today. I am beyond thrilled to have Karine Silverwoman with us today. Karine is an experienced social worker, therapist, consultant, educator, as well as a personal trainer. Her work is informed by her lived experience over 20 years of working in social work field and her engagement in social justice activism. Karine's work and life reflect her strong belief, and we must approach the world and one another with absolute care, compassion, attention to justice, and taking the time for reflection. And that is what Karine is going to be speaking with us today, is that reflection and the care piece. So over to you, Karine.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, can you see, Laura?
Yeah, very good.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I just want to say thank you for having me. This is an incredible organization that makes the world a better place. And I am truly grateful to be in collaboration to talk about this important topic. This topic is near and dear to my heart. And I think now more than ever, we need to find many different strategies to take care of ourselves. My sense is that anyone that is in this webinar is a helper of some sort. So we will be curious together as to personal and collective ways that we can support ourselves and each other. So my hope is that this workshop for you is both nourishing to your soul, nourishing to your nervous system, and also intellectually stimulating. So I will try and kind of hold all of these pieces together. So it is completely normal when we're talking about concepts such as self-care, vicarious trauma. I'm going to be talking about oppression, colonialism. It's completely normal for a variety of emotions, sensations to arise unconsciously and consciously. So just take a moment, just check in with yourself. What will you do if you are feeling overwhelmed in this workshop? How will you know that? Because I really want to take this hour together to not override your feelings, your body sensations. So you might even want to lie down, sit at a more comfortable chair, not at your regular desk chair. You might want to just listen to my words. So let's just take 30 seconds just to notice what kind of energy we're bringing into this time together. Not trying to change anything, just notice it. So my hope is that we will be reflective on what's going well within our own self-care practices and what can be improved. And to really think of self-care from a micro, meso, and macro perspective. And then, of course, my hope for today is that you feel a bit more relaxed and nourished. It is completely normal and exciting for me if you are yawning in our session, because that is a sign for me that you're kind of coming down. And it's really, really hard to slow down in the middle of the day. And so just notice what it's like to try and really pause and be present and connected to yourself as we move through the topic. So I'm not going to share more about myself other than I am in this self-care journey along with you. I am a human being like all of you. And one of the reasons I love teaching and engaging with this work is because it is so humbling. It is so humbling because I've been there and I know what it's like to feel tired or overwhelmed or triggered about the work. So it makes me even more connected and passionate about teaching it. So I cannot talk about self-care, vicarious trauma without talking about um, anti-colonialism and a social justice lens. To me, they all blend, they all go together, and they cannot be talked about in silos. I liked how Laura talked about collaboration, because to me, the more we talk about self-care in silo, the more we perpetuate kind of colonial understandings. So I was taught the 7th-generation teachings, and how I was taught it from a settler perspective is that every decision one makes, one should think about and embody the 7 generations behind us and the 7 generations ahead of us. So all the decisions that we make today, we should be thinking 7 generations in front of us. And that's also how we embody collective care. The more we take care of ourselves in this present moment, the more we'll be able to take care of our communities, the more we'll be able to center those most pushed to the margins, and the more we'll be able to take care of the land and the earth. I'm going to be skipping some slides because, as per usual, I overdid it. So this is a quote that I like to kind of set the tone between this rhythm of thinking of self-care from an individual and a collective perspective by Dr. Sarah King. The central proposition of the science of social justice is that social justice and well-being are one and the same thing. It explores the idea that these phenomena are so inextricably linked as pathways to one another that they are virtually indistinguishable on the individual and collective levels of the experience of being aware. I propose that we can better understand how people can comprise communities who reflect emotional health into the world by thinking about collectives of people as collective nervous systems. And keep in mind from this workshop that we all absorb information at different paces. There's going to be some things that you take away from this and some things that might need to simmer and you'll come back to. So when I think about kind of the helping profession, I like to think of folks as trauma stewards, based on the book by Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky. And for me, trauma stewards is this kind of essence where we learn how to hold our own suffering so that we can hold other people's suffering. So her quote is, when we talk about trauma in terms of stewardship, we remember that we are being entrusted with people's stories and their very lives, animals' well-beings, our planet's health. We understand that this is an incredible honor as well as a tremendous responsibility. So in that regard, when I'm talking about concepts such as vicarious trauma, I don't actually use those words a lot. I don't really kind of talk about terms like vicarious trauma, and I actually don't even use the term self-care that much, because vicarious trauma, it does happen, of course, but it can be a limiting term, because I also like to think of vicarious resilience, vicarious strength. So we'll get more into that in a bit. Well, we'll switch. Okay. So if there's one quote that you're going to remember from today, it is this one. The slower you go, the faster you get there. So just take a minute with that. This has definitely been my lifelong journey because I am a very speedy person, and I've realized that I can actually get just as much done from a slower pace. I'm much more skillful and discerning and able to be nourished if I'm slower. And of course, as we start to really delve into the topic, we have to see self care from a politicized lens. That when we talk about slowing down, we can't not talk about how capitalism, white supremacy are all ableism are all interconnected with this term. So there's a type of therapy that I was trained in called somatic experiencing. And one of the kind of terms is called pendulation and titration. And basically, it's the understanding that when we talk about heavy topics such as trauma, vicarious trauma, self-care, we want to kind of touch it and then move away, touch it and then move away. So in our time together, we are going to pendulate back and forth to talking about heavy topics and then to looking at cute pictures or looking at beautiful images. And I really encourage you to let these images settle into your system. Because unfortunately, our brains are and our nervous systems are kind of Velcro for negative experiences. So we have to train our bodies to kind of install positive, neutral experiences. So I like this quote because sometimes when we're talking about vicarious trauma and self-care, we get into a reductive, diagnostic narrative about ourselves. And we start to really judge ourselves for feeling, quote, burnt out or having really strong stress responses. And to me, they're all normal adaptive responses to an overwhelming, intense world. So I brought this in because these are the same kind of symptoms that we experience with vicarious trauma. And one of the really important things for me when I'm teaching about trauma and vicarious trauma is that every single one of these array of symptoms is a completely normal adaptive response. Our bodies are built to survive at any cost. We will always pick anything to not feel something unbearable. So all of these elements, when people are coming to me, with a lot of shame that they're experiencing this, I really first ask them to thank these parts. Because even though it's unpleasant to disassociate or to, have lots of irritability or depression, though that is happening as a survival coping strategy. And there's a part of you that needs to be honored for that before we change it. So Janina Fisher, a really amazing therapist, writes, "It would be rare in the mental health treatment world to think of these symptoms," so some of the symptoms I just showed, "as adaptive strategies made possible by the body's instinctive survival defenses. But from a neurobiologically informed perspective, they are survival resources, ways the body and mind adapted for optimal survival in a dangerous world." Imagine if we thanked our bodies for disassociating. Yes, it's not a sustainable, pleasant, lifelong way of being, because when we disassociate from pain, we also disassociate from joy. But it is a completely normal, understandable response. And imagine if we were asking each other questions like, how did the person survive? How did I resist? Those kinds of questions, when we ask each other those questions, incite really different responses than what's wrong with you, or why are you burnt out, or what are all the horrible things that have ever happened to you. One of the really, really powerful questions when we're talking about self-care is, what is our history with care? What is our personal history with worthiness? Our personal history of slowing down? How often as adults do we override our body sensations, even things like thirst? And when did those overriding of our body's cues begin? For many of us, especially marginalized folks, our history of self-care is really complicated. It's really loaded. It's connected to all sorts of other elements. So when people tell us to just relax or take a deep breath or have a bubble bath, all those things are absolutely good and fine, but they are not navigating the root, the deep elements that are connected to care for our own well-beings. Many people have had a history of having to push their own self-care to the side as a way to survive. And with that topic often comes a place of shame. Shame that we don't know how to take care of our well-being. Shame that slowing down feels so uncomfortable. So just take a moment to read this quote. And of course, when we're talking about self-care and taking care of ourselves, we get this kind of, I like this term, internalized capitalism, where we have all the energy in the world to care for others, but when it comes to ourselves, that's not seen as productive. That's not seen as worthy. And where do these concepts come from? they're all connected to me. They're all connected to how we're able to care for ourselves, how we're able to care for the land. Okay. So just take a moment. Let's just do a little check-in. Just notice what it's like to be hearing my voice, talking about all of this. Notice how all of this is landing on your body. So I'm going to put my hand on my heart because I feel a bit excited. Maybe for you, you might want to put your hand there or put your hand here. Put your arms across. So just take a moment, just settle for a second. I rarely tell people to take a deep breath, but I do invite people to notice their breath, to notice maybe the rise and fall, or to notice the sound of your breath. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit more from a micro perspective on how we can kind of care for ourselves, but also just get to know ourselves, really. So, some of the questions that I like to start with when we're talking about our own self care is, what are our values? What are our ethics? And how do we like to grow? And how do we connect? What are the things that sustain us in the work that we're doing? Because those are your anchors. And it's really important to know your anchors, because when your anchors are not rooted or you don't know them, it's hard to come back to them. It's hard to know if they're not there anymore. It's hard to know how do you come back to them. And then, of course, there's also questions like, what depletes me in the work? How do I know I'm depleted in the work? How do I know I'm off balance? And what brings me back into balance? So I just finished being a director of counseling at a gender-based violence agency for almost 4 years. And there were many, many times, as much as I know myself, as much as I get clinical supervision and do all the things, unconsciously, there were times my own nervous system got tricked. My own nervous system thought all of these kind of crises around me were happening to me. And I really had to be reflective on what is my stuff and what is their stuff, and how is it possibly seeping in to me, and how do I tend to my stuff so that I can attend to their stuff. This is a really complicated process, but it's deeply important. So much of our work is our nervous systems. So much of our work is self-reflection. If you were a musician, you would have to tune your instrument and make sure that it was okay. Well, our instruments in the helping profession are our nervous systems, our balance, our equanimity. So we have to actually really delve into our own stuff. which isn't always fun, but very important. So we're pendulating back. Because one of the things about when we're talking about these heavy concepts is that our worlds can feel really small. But it's really important to remind ourselves that the world is bigger than this pain or this sensation in our bodies. So either just take a look around your room or take a look at this beautiful picture. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a concept called the window of tolerance. I'm not sure who's in the room, so I don't know if you've heard of this concept or not. But like any important concept, I think it's important to just keep relearning it and keep revisiting it from different angles. I'm just going to have some water. One second. Okay. So the window of tolerance has different names. So that's why I put in all of these names. But the most common name is the window of tolerance. Okay. So basically, every single person, for the most part, has a place within them where they are mostly okay, where they are able to ride the waves of life. They are able to hold multiple truths. They are able to have a regulated breath, a mostly regulated nervous system. Every person has some kind of window or memory of this. It doesn't mean you are happy all the time and positive all the time. That's not what being in your window means. Being in your window means you're in a place where you're flexible enough to be able to see injustice in the world, feel stressed about your life, and also know that you can access the breath. Know that you can access another truth or another perspective. When you're out of your window, you can only think in binaries. Things are good or things are bad. That person is crappy and or not. When we are out of our window, we either go up high, and you do not have to remember these terms, but you either go up high, and this is called hyperarousal. This is when you're anxious, irritable, edgy, panicky, or you go down low. And this is when you are blah, checked out, depressed, disassociated. So just ask yourself, where do you tend to go when you are out of your window? Where are you in your window right now? There's no judgment in whatever the answer is. I will give you a personal anecdote here. So about 20 minutes before this workshop, I was doing all my meditation and gearing up and feeling very much in my window. And then I got a phone call from the school that my daughter fell. And I immediately went outside of my window. she fell, we're going to the hospital, I have to cancel this workshop, everything's terrible, oh my gosh, like literally in half a second out of my window. And so then my wife, who often supports me in coming back into my window, says, okay, everything's okay, I'm going to get her, we'll figure this out. She used her calm, wonderful presence and voice, and I was able to come back into my window. And just FYI, my daughter is okay. But I found it all very humbling. So I'm with you in all of this. Our habitual patterns are so automatic that we easily can go out of our window. And what's really important is to ask ourselves, have I been out of my window for an hour, a day, years? And to also ask yourself, what brings you back into your window? What are your red flags that you are on the verge of being out of your window? One of the things that I've worked on a lot in my life is I was always good at noticing when I'm in my window, noticing when I'm out of my window, but I had a hard time finding those really subtle red flags that kind of were these little micro moments where I was overriding my needs. And then not the more I was able to really see those micro moments, the more I was able to be more flexible in and out of my window. So again, the goal is not to be happy, positive, regulated human beings all the time, because that would also be overriding your human experience. The hope is to be curious about your window and to find more flexibility so that you can come in and out of your window, so that we're not thinking in binaries. We're not making decisions out of binaries. We're not making decisions out of that hyper aroused or hypo aroused state. So this is not a real poll. You're just asking yourself this. So I'm going to go over a couple tools and practices that some we'll just talk about and some we'll do together to support you in coming back into your window. So grounding and orienting is one way to come back into your window. These are tools to reorient to the here and the now. Often we use the 5 senses to bring us into the here and now. So these are some grounding tools that I like to use. Whether you're conscious of it or not, you're always using grounding techniques to support yourself. But it's really important to try and expand your toolbox. So if we were in person and I had my baby with me and she was crying and I passed my baby to Laura or Ryan, they would go, oh, it's okay. You're okay. Shh. You're going to be okay. And they might rock her or they might sing to her. Well, guess what? These are all the things that we also need as adults, that we often feel shame about talking to ourselves this way. So I'm going to just do an exercise with you all that I like to do to support myself coming back into my window, or to do it in the middle of the day if I've really been running around or I've held a lot of intense stories. So I invite you to try this with me and just be curious. And of course, don't do anything that you don't want to do. So your left hand is going to go behind your head. This is also your brain stem, the part of your brain that's always scanning for threat, unconsciously and consciously. It's very powerful to put your hand there and just let it kind of relax for a second. And then you're going to put your right hand over your forehead. And this is where you might want to soften your shoulders, soften your eyes, soften your jaw. And your right hand stays on your forehead. Your left hand goes on your heart. And this is where you might want to notice the rise and fall of your breath. Then your right hand goes on your belly. Your left hand stays on your heart. This is where you might want to say some kind words to yourself. Sometimes I'll say to myself, what really matters in this moment? Or I might say, it's like this right now. This is when I wish we were all in person or I could see your faces to see how you've responded, but maybe you'll share with me in the Q&A. So the other thing that kind of supports people in coming back into their window is thinking of glimmers. That's kind of the other spectrum of triggers, thinking of images, sensations, tastes that bring us this memory of joy, nourishment. Some people really like to use affirmations to bring us back into our windows, bring us back into our bodies. For some of us, thinking about our ancestors, thinking about intergenerational strength, intergenerational resilience, to support ourselves, to come back into our window. I'm going to show a little video from Lama Rod Owens. And this is another practice that might support you in coming into your window. Let me know if you can't hear. Hold on.
I feel sometimes the trauma and the grief and the rage and the despair seems like it's trying to consume me. I just kind of sit and I close my eyes and I start thinking about the future. And the future that I really want to see, this future where we're not struggling to be well, that we're not victims of systematic and institutional violence, a future where I and all the communities that I'm a part of and all people have access to the resources that they need to be well and free and happy, and what that feels like to live in that kind of future. Then I open my eyes and I just think about my ancestors who were wanting me to be free. So I feel their prayers and their love in the back of me, pushing me forward. And I feel my descendants emerging in front of me with their prayers and aspirations pulling me into this future. And I think about all the work that I'm doing and if that work is aligned with this future, right? And I think about all the ways in which I have committed myself to bringing about this liberated future, right? And I just come back to the work and I continue working with the support of my ancestors and my descendants.
So I love thinking about that video and thinking about our ancestors and also thinking about the 7-generation teachings and how if we align ourselves with our values, if we are connected to making the world a better place on an individual and collective scale, it is also what brings us back into our window. Let me just fix this. Okay, so 1 second. We're pendulating, and I love this picture because that is what pendulating, the experience is a wave where we touch pain, we touch suffering, and then we move away a little bit. We touch it again, and then we expand. So the other thing that can help us bring us back into our window of tolerance, our window of wisdom, our window of Vicki Reynolds calls it the zone of fabulousness, is to create boundaries. And to me, there's so many different types of boundaries, many that we don't often talk about. And there's also our relationship to boundaries in the same way that we have complicated relationships to self-care. We're going to have complicated relationships to the experience of boundaries based on our lived experiences. So one of the elements of boundaries that I like to focus on for myself is more around kind of energetic boundaries. Knowing how to really be present with your body on what is arising for you as you do this work. And how do you stay deeply compassionate, deeply committed, while also having energetic boundaries? I also really like to think of, when we're talking about boundaries and being in the window, thinking about rest in a deeper way. Because sometimes we just say, oh, you should rest or take care of yourself, but that can mean so many different things to different people. For example, what I am trying to work on is the rest of not doing. I'm very good at the things that are connected to doing, walking and therapy and eating and exercise. Those are all the doing self-care. But the literal unstructured time and not doing is something I'm working on as a type of rest. So the other kind of micro element, thinking about self-care, is how do we hold all these stories that we hear and we witness? Do you have rituals of what you do with these stories? Are there ways that these stories can be held onto in a place of compassion? And are there ways that these stories can be let go of in a place of compassion? I think there's a lot of shame that people have when they talk about bringing stories home, or I don't know how to not think about things after 9 to 5. And I do a lot of clinical supervision for many agencies that are in the helping profession. And so many frontline staff come to me with that, with this shame that they are feeling stories when they come home. And I've actually disrupted this. You should keep work from work and home from home. And in fact, what's it trying to tell you and what does it need? Sometimes actually meeting those stories with a breath of care and regard actually softens it. Because what we resist persists. What we pay attention to grows. So back to the political for a minute. A wonderful quote by Kai Chang Tong. Do not be fooled into thinking that social liberation is a feat that can be accomplished solely through, quote, wellness frameworks, therapeutic initiatives, or the politics of representation. Only real and universal changes in social access to food, security, housing, education, and healthcare and other social goods can do this. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit about collective care and really honor that no matter how much we take care of ourselves, none of this can really sustain us in the work if we don't have systemic justice, systemic access to basic human rights. So I'm calling it culture of care. So things that really support with these kind of meso, agency level collective care are ongoing supervision. There's a lot of research that shows one of the mitigating factors of vicarious trauma are supervision, debriefing with colleagues, having a culture of openness and vulnerability, having enough training on trauma-informed practice, and centering justice, social justice, and equity. There's also the concept of low impact debriefing that is an important meso approach to care. And that's the understanding that if we're constantly sharing really intense details of our work, it can be harmful, and that we have to find ways to talk about the work, to be really honest about the impact, but to maybe do it in a way where we're retelling, not reliving. So one of the ways of doing this is if you're sharing, really intense information about something, you might do it, do a newspaper headline versus newspaper detail. You might say, this person had a really hard life. That's the newspaper headline. And you're not going to share the newspaper details unless it feels really important, or unless you give fair warning to the person or people you're sharing. The other elements of a culture of care are sick days where people actually feel okay to take them. There's a culture of taking breaks. There's a culture where the staff and the clients can be at the center. That there are clear expectations, that people are valued for their work and fair compensation. So all of these elements are part of self-care and collective care. Because we need all of these elements. Your boss cannot force you to drink water. Your boss cannot force you to notice your breath. You have that responsibility to grow your edges on that. However, it is not fair to only, have an expectation of staff to take care of themselves just from drinking water. You need to have collective measures for people to feel cared for. So I'm just leaving for you to read some other elements of important pieces for creating a culture of care in your agencies. And we are pendulating. So just really noticing, how are you doing in this moment? How do you feel now compared to when you first arrived into this session? What might you need? So we've talked about micro, all of the kind of individual reflective questions. We've talked about our window of tolerance, all these different types of approaches to care for ourselves. We've talked about the meso. So all of these different types of ways that the culture that we're in, the agencies we're in, the communities that we're part of can support each other. And then there's also the macro. These are the kind of elements of solidarity, thinking about accessibility, thinking about how we center those most pushed into the margins, how we can grow interdependence and interconnectedness. So just take a look at this image. These are all ways to support structural, systemic, collective care. We really, really saw in the pandemic, and still now, who is most pushed to the margins, and thinking about people from an intersectional lens, most marginalized folks pushed to the wayside in our society. Sorry, I'm skipping some things. The other kind of element of collective care is to think about our world in a creative way, to imagine possibilities such as non-carceral, non-punitive ways of treating people. And just really notice in your body what it's like to think about a different world, a more interconnected, beautiful world. Notice what that feels like. Is there hope? Is there grief? Can both exist in your body at the same time? So I always like to remind people that we've heard trauma lives in the body, but so does joy, healing, dance, magic, love, and so much more. So when we're kind of thinking about that pendulation, just really remembering that. I also like to remind people that hope is a discipline. And Miriam Kaba, a Black activist who's written a lot about abolitionists in the US, talked about hope doesn't preclude feeling sadness or frustration or anger or any other emotion that makes total sense. Hope isn't an emotion, you know. Hope is not optimism. Hope is a discipline. We have to practice it every day. And Dr. David Williams said, being engaged and fighting for one's future and trying to make a difference is actually a resource that is protective for at least some mental health outcomes. I also love this quote by two incredible writers and activists. I want to build societies where we take care of the land and the waters and live in a way that promotes more life. I want to live in a way that doesn't cause the distinction of vast numbers of plants and animals, where environmental desecration isn't inevitable, where extractivist economies are not the norm, and where capitalism isn't assumed to be permanent, where there are communal and embodied ethics and practices that make slavery and colonialism unthinkable, where 100 musicians show up at a busy intersection and no one is surprised. So again, just taking a moment, just noticing how this is all landed for you. My suggestion is to think of one or two intentions from today's workshop that you might want to implement or be curious about in your life. And maybe write those down. Or think of a micro, a meso, and a macro intention for self-care and collective care. So yes, thank you for coming. You are welcome to join my mailing list or check out my website. I do workshops on trauma, leadership, self-care, and other things. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and leave some opportunity for questions, feelings, comments, or anything else.
Well, Karine, I need to take an opportunity and thank you so much. I was going to share my video when we were going through some of the exercises you were doing, but I was so relaxed that I chose not to share my video. Thank you very much. I found personally you practicing pendulating from those really impactful topics that all of us that interact with vulnerable individuals that have been victimized. I found that personally extremely helpful. We got no questions because I think everyone was very ingrained in your session. So normally we do leave about 15 minutes for questions, but I'm happy to announce that you covered everything. And the only question we got was around your private practice. So maybe you could just briefly speak to the audience about your private practice and where they can find you on social media and such.
Sure. So again, it's a huge compliment to me if any of you are yawning. That's like a huge joy. If someone yawns in my workshop, it's a compliment. I'm not right now I'm focusing my time and energy on giving trainings and doing consultation for agencies and clinical supervision. So I'm not doing one-on-one therapy. Right now I'm doing clinical supervision, group supervision, and trainings and consultation with agencies. So you're welcome to connect with me on those.
One,
Yeah.
wonderful. And I saw my colleague Ryan had put your information in the chat box as far as your website. And what I'm doing is, if Rand's still around, I don't have the slide deck up. I wanted to draw everyone's attention to some upcoming webinars that we will be hosting. So just give me a moment.
Sorry, I'm just going to bring up the slide deck here. Sorry.
Thanks, Rand.
I apologize. So I'm just going to.
And maybe if you're able to share the handout, folks will see I really nerd out and I put a lot of things on there. So, and if you go to my website, I also have a tab that says resources, where I put a lot of resources on trauma and self-care. Yeah, and I'm really I welcome you to share your experience of doing any of the activities, and also just a reminder that it's completely normal if any of the activities I did not feel good and did not feel relaxing, and that's just wisdom for you. That's wisdom that maybe there's a relationship to that exercise that might need to be explored. So we really want to titrate and do what feels right for you. There's no judgment or shame on whatever practices you do. It's all really humbling, because so much of the time we tell others to take a deep breath, but we haven't in 10 years. So
I do want to take the opportunity and draw your attention, Karine, to the positive feedback that we're getting in the chat box. The one that really resonates with me, and I can speak to it myself, is the difference of how I'm feeling right now than when I initially joined this session today. So I thank you for my relaxed feeling for right now, and we'll see how long that lasts within my body. So over to you, Rayanne.
Thank you. Yes, thank you again for that. It just makes me reflect on my own, way of working and need to relax and reflective, changing practices. So thank you for that, and for everyone's comments, for participating today. I just wanted to bring up a couple things that are happening in the next month. So Seniors Month is in June, but we also celebrate World Elder Abuse Awareness Day and recognizing the rights of older adults. So we are doing a national forum, again, with our partners, the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, CanAge, and the British Columbia Community Response Networks. So you'll see more information on our websites, as well as the wead.ca. So this is just the lineup of our speakers that we have. We're pretty excited about having everyone join us. They're pretty high esteemed speakers. So we'll have a great conversation around ageism and the rights of older adults, and the work that's being done nationally and internationally to combat ageism and come up with solutions and approaches to best address these issues within Canada. We do have resources on our website, just to remind people. This is just a sampling, but please go to our website under fact sheets or tools, and you'll see the information that you can download available for you, no matter what issues you're looking for. You can also request training or education sessions from Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario as well. Just lastly, before we wind up, is your evaluation. There's going to be a pop-up. If you don't mind just giving some feedback, that would be greatly appreciated. And we'll follow up hopefully in the next day to have everything posted on our website as well. You can contact myself or Laura. This is my contact information with emails. Again, our staff team is on our website with everybody's contact information. And my colleague Laura, as well. We are very active on social media. We post all of our updates and retweet, and so we're constantly doing something at least once a day or more. So have a look at all of the social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So thank you again. Thank you so much again, Karine, for sharing all your wisdom and information with us today. We really appreciate it, and also for our ASL interpreters who joined us as well. So thank you again, and we will check our website for upcoming events and any new resources that we have. Thank you.